And now let me welcome Louisville head coach Chris Mack onto the show. Chris, thanks for being here, man. How's it going?
Good, Rob. How you doing?
I'm doing well.
Thanks for having me.
So, what are your expectations for this team heading into the season? Obviously, we have a new year coming up. We're actually going to have fans back in the Yum Center. You got a little bit of turnover on your roster, but I'm pretty excited to get this thing going. What's your expectations?
Yeah, we got a lot of turnover. I mean, you talk about a lot of new players. It seems like college basketball is ever evolving, and now the rosters with transfers being immediately eligible and just changed the game. It's really changed the game, and so I'm really excited. I think we got a hungry group. I think we have way more depth than I've had in any previous year since I've been here. Certainly some unproven guys, but to have 14 guys on scholarship is something that really, really unique. I mean, Malik Williams coming back allowed us to have one extra on our roster with COVID. And so I'm really excited to have the Yum Center filled again and not be behind a plexiglass and all that goes with it. I think we have a really good team. I think we have a hungry team.
So you mentioned the 14 scholarship players. How are you going to balance all that playing time? Like, I guarantee every single one of those 14 guys thinks that they're good enough to be starting. They're going to want to play minutes. How do you kind of balance expectations and maybe manage egos is probably the best way to phrase it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that our guys understand that playing time is earned in practice, and it really doesn't matter how your recruiting process went. The only thing that matters is what you do between the lines. And we've tried to identify high character guys that didn't come here based on promises. They came here to compete. And so, I don't know many coaches that play that many players. And with the way that we want to play, Rob, and the fact that I think we have enough talent, we are going to play into our roster a little bit deeper. And we're going to have to, in order to wear teams down and be sort of who we want to be. But it all falls on the players in terms of like separating themselves in practice with their effort and their production.
I do think there is some benefit to that, right? Because you're going to have guys that are competing every single day in practice. And the only way to get better is to compete every single day in practice. I think where we're going to see that the most is probably in your backcourt. Last year you had one of the best backcourts in the country with Carlik and David Johnson. They were kind of, I don't want to say set in stone, but we all knew what was going to happen with Louisville's backcourt last year. This year, it's a little bit more of a question mark, right? I mean, you got L. Ellis coming in, you got Jared West coming in, you got Mason Faulkner coming in, you got Noah Lott coming in. There's a lot of new faces and a lot of guys that are going to be competing for those minutes. Who's impressed you so far through the summer and the fall, and what can we kind of expect out of that backcourt?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you certainly are right when we go back to last year, knowing sort of what we had, but we also had guys who played way too many minutes, no matter what their talent level was. And, for us, again, I think a big factor for our team needs to be our depth. Each one of those guys that you mentioned brings something different to the table. I think Noah is by far the best shooter of the group. I think Mason Faulkner is a guy that really thrives in key moments, a little bit like Carlik in the sense that, loves to have his hands on the basketball and the game, end of clock situations. I think Jared does a terrific job of running his team. L's probably the most dynamic, the guy that is more of a playmaker than any of them really. So, and then you throw a guy like Mike James in there as a freshman who will play a little bit off guard for us as well. And we feel really comfortable, but I think they all bring different things to the table.
So we talked a little bit about the transfers earlier. To me, up transfers have been kind of hit and miss, right? Guys that come from the low major and go to the high major level. Obviously, Carlik Jones, you guys hit a home run with that one. You've had other point guards that didn't necessarily pan out as well as Carlik did. You got Mason Faulkner this year, and you got Jared West this year. What have you seen out of those guys, and what is it that you look for out of point guards at a lower level when you want to bring them up and bring them into the ACC? What are the kind of skill sets or traits that you're looking for?
Well, I think it's different. Different players have different skill sets. For us, I look at character of the player first and foremost. What is their intention? Why are they transferring? For Jared, he's a guy that loved it at Marshall, had a phenomenal career, was a 3-year starter, was the captain of his team. And, based on who we were losing and not really having anything returning on the perimeter, I wanted a guy that could be really, really steady and run his team. And that's exactly what we have with Jared. He's a phenomenal on-ball defender. A little bit like Kihei Clark in the sense that he likes to pick guys up and turn them and pressure them and get under them, which is a huge compliment, when it comes to the defensive end of the basketball court. With Mason, again, he's a guy that loves big moments. So skill sets may be different. I want guys that want to come in here and win and be part of something that's bigger than who they are as a player. And in both of those cases, we feel like we hit a home run.
So Jeff Greer hosts a podcast on the Field of 68 Media Network called Floyd Street's Finest. And one thing that he's been talking about all offseason is Samuell Williamson, his jump shot, and kind of that expected development and whether or not he can make the leap into being kind of quote unquote the guy for you guys this year. So what have you seen in the growth of his game, and where have you tried to get him to get better?
Yeah, I mean, Sam's put a lot of time into his shot, but he shouldn't be defined and doesn't need to be defined by how he shoots the ball. He has to be able to recognize those moments in our offense that he can take advantage of, his ability to get in the lane, draw fouls, finish at the rim, get to that pull up, which we know is really, really effective, and be a tremendous rebounder. I think he's one of the best wing rebounders in the conference. Last year he had almost a 20 rebound game against Georgia Tech. And, at 6'6", 6'7", that doesn't happen often for any guy at that position. So while we want Sam to improve his shooting, we feel like the sum of all of our parts, some of the guys that we brought in around him can really, really shoot the ball. And that's going to give us a wider floor to work with, a lot more spacing, which for a guy like Sam should fall right into his wheelhouse. And I suspect he'll shoot the ball better than he has all of his career.
Yeah, a lot of shooting is confidence, right? You just got to see those first couple go down.
Yep.
So the guy that's going to be paired with him in the front court might end up being Jalen Withers. That's another guy that has kind of gotten a little bit of buzz this offseason. Where has he improved, and what have you seen out of him over the course of the summer and the fall?
Jalen, as a freshman, a redshirt freshman, played really out of position, by necessity. And the fact that Malik Williams was injured and wasn't able to play last year, put Jalen at the 5. I don't even know if he played the 5 in high school. And so while he has so much talent, he's 6'9", he has the ability to block shots, play above the rim. The times that he was able to play on the perimeter a little bit more for us, he was really successful. And so he's really made that jump virtually all off season. I don't think we've played him 1 minute at the 5. And so he's had to make sure he's a lot stronger with his perimeter making decisions, driving from the perimeter versus driving closer to the basket, based on your position. But, Jalen can do anything he wants on the basketball court. He's got to do it with consistency. And that's been something that's plagued him early in his career, like a lot of early, like a lot of guys early in their career. So Jalen brings a whole lot of talent to the table. We're trying to get that motor revved up every minute he's on the floor. And if that's the case, then he has a chance to be one of the best players in our league.
So one of the things that I keep hearing about Malik Williams is kind of that leadership and the presence in the locker room, right? It's to say nothing of what he actually does on the court itself. It's just he's one of those guys that brings everybody together, right? So how important was it for you guys to get that kind of a player and that kind of a presence back for his super senior season?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. You don't get experience in a program without going through a lot of games, a lot of tough moments, a lot of winning moments. He's also as smart as they come, especially for being a big guy. I think a lot of times guards are what you think of when you think of the brains of your operation, running a team, making decisions. Malik's as smart as any ball player that I've coached. And he does it on the defensive end. A year ago, he was completely wrecked with injuries and just was a miserable experience for him. And he still tried to tough it out by using that voice, but it's hard when you're not playing. We've gotten to the point where he's practicing every single day. He feels as healthy as he has, his entire career. And he's a huge presence for us, both on the court as a player and off the court as a leader. He's an everyday guy, Rob.
So there's a bunch of guys, we talked about you having 14 scholarships that I haven't mentioned, like DeAndre Davis, Matt Cross, JJ Trainer, Sidney Curry, Gabe Wisnitzer, I think is how you pronounce it. So there's a lot of bodies and a lot of different looks that you can run out there. Who have been the guys that have impressed you this summer? Who's kind of taken a step forward?
Well, I think Jalen, Withers, who we talked about before, has taken a big step forward. I think when you mention a guy like Dre Davis, Dre's an everyday guy. Really understands his role, the defensive end like no other. He's a real tough, competitive kid, and that's what our team wants to embody. And I think that he's had a really, really good summer, a really good fall. I think L. Ellis has come a long way. He's come miles since our first workout in the summer to now. He can get ahead of himself a little bit, lose the ball, make some tough decisions, as a guy from junior college tends to do at times. But you can't teach what he has, Rob. And that's talent. That's a burst. And so, again, Noah's had a good preseason as well. And so we're really anxious to get it rolling November 9th.
All right, I'll end it with this, Chris. We don't need to relive the details, but I know that the last 18 months have been pretty trying for you both personally and professionally. So all of that's happening at the same time that the world changed in March of 2020. So how are you holding up with all of that? Sometimes people forget that the people in sports are also people. So how have you been doing with all of that?
I'm good, man. I'm chomping at the bit to start competing with my team. And so I'll leave it at that. All the BS is in the back. I'm looking forward to coaching my team this coming November.
And last thing, do you have any updates? I'm sure I know what the answer is, but do you have any updates on the timeline for the NCAA stuff? Have you heard anything about that? I'm guessing it's
not really. I've heard towards the end of the year, I think that they're all backed up with, cases and whatnot. So who knows?
That's the way it always works. Listen, Chris, I appreciate the time. Best of luck this season.
Thanks for having me, Rob. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man. I really do appreciate it.
Not a problem, man.
Take care.
All right, you too.
Before we move on, let me tell you guys a little bit about our partners over at BetRivers Sportsbook. If you haven't signed up for BetRivers yet, now is the time because they are offering a $250 match bonus for your first deposit. But what sets them apart is that they require just one playthrough to turn your bonus into cash money. With their Rush Pay instant approval, withdrawing your winnings is safer, it's more secure, and it's more reliable. Now that basketball season is tipping off, get in on the action at betrivers.com today or by downloading the BetRivers iOS app. You must be 21 years or older. If you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. And while I got you here, let's talk about the Field of 68 Media Network, where college basketball matters most all year round. This is a digital media and podcast network that we've been building over the course of the last year. We have shows hosted by some of your favorite players covering the program that they love the most. AJ Guyton hosts the House of Hoosier. Eric Devendorf covers Syracuse on the scorer's table. Dan Dickow hosts the Gonzaga Bulldog broadcast. We have Florida's Patrick Young and Duke's Andre Dawkins and North Carolina's Samuell Williams and Michigan's Stu Douglas and Illinois' Deion Thomas. The list goes on and on and on. We have more than 30 shows right now. So hit the links below and check them all out. And while you're at it, make sure that you go check out the Field of 12 Media Network, your home for college football. That was Louisville head coach Chris Mack, and now I am joined by Floyd Street's finest host and my buddy Jeff Greer to talk a little bit about this Cardinals basketball team. Jeff, what's going on, man? Thanks for being here.
Yeah, happy to be here. I'm excited to talk a little hoop. It's crazy the season's so close.
So we obviously have to talk about the big news right up front. The most important story is that Great Flood Brewery has trivia nights. Talk to me about this.
Oh man, Great Flood has the best trivia nights. I made a killing there many a time over the years. And it's always very fun. They're also showing cards games throughout the fall for football season. They're going to have basketball watch parties as well. So I'm a huge fan of Great Flood.
Yeah, I just got to say for the people at Great Flood that are listening to this, don't be afraid to send a 6-pack my way. I will gladly drink.
They have really good beer
on my couch watching. It doesn't even have to be Louisville basketball. I'll watch anything while drinking a Great Flood beer on my couch. So Yeah, just to get that out of the way. Anyway, we got to talk about what's going on with this Louisville program with Dino Gaudio, the Gaudio audio, Chris Mack getting suspended. So what's the vibe like down there right now? Because I got to imagine there's a little bit of pent up frustration that this program just cannot get out of its own way.
Well, first of all, we like to call it the Gaudio. It's you can just jam it together. No, look, I think that it has calmed down quite a bit. It definitely reached a fever pitch when the audio came out, the suspension was announced. That was not good. I mean, that was a bad look for the program. I think everybody knows that. There's room for debate on 6 games if that was too much for Chris Mack, but that's a whole other topic. I think the bottom line is that Louisville fans are sick of hearing about Louisville in the headlines, even if they perceive it to be overblown by their standards of or by their thought process, that it should not rise to the level of being national news sometimes. The bottom line is when Louisville's name is in headlines nationally at this point, it's a sinking feeling for this fan base because for obvious reasons. I mean, it's been this way for now 6 or 7 years, even longer than that with some of the Patino stuff that originally popped up in the 2000s. So it has been frustrating for the fans, but since that all happened, they had Louisville Live, which is their kind of like Midnight Madness type event. It's not at midnight, obviously, but it's a big event. It's a great marketing tool. It's a recruiting tool. And, I think fans have kind of turned the page to thinking about the season again. And that certainly helps in a city where, I mean, when we're in like June, we're still talking about projected starting 5s and stuff in the city. So people want to be talking about that. And I feel like the conversation has gotten back to that.
Yeah, it's got to be such a grinding feeling because the Catino Powell stuff happened. That was like 2014, I believe, right? 2015.
Mm-hmm.
So that was 6 years ago. And because of everything that happened with the FBI investigation, which by the way was 4 years ago, it's never really gone away because you have to worry about like what's the ruling going to be because we were already on probation and all this stuff stacking up and this, that, and the third. So it feels like this entire saga has been hanging over the program for like 6 years. And that's just as somebody that's a fan of a team that can't get out of their own way, the Tottenham Hotspur, you see the thing right over there, but it's got to be such a frustrating feeling to know that this is always going to be something that's hanging over the head and always going to be a talking point. Case in point is what we lead a season preview with when we're talking about it right now.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think that having a good team this year will help a lot with that. I mean, I know that it doesn't take away from them waiting for the Ncaa ruling on the FBI stuff. It doesn't take away from just the lingering bad feelings to do with how the assistant coaching stuff was handled behind the scenes. And obviously it's going to smack everybody in the face again right at the start of the season when Chris Mack is not on the sidelines. That's going to be something that people have to adjust to for a few games, and we'll remind them of some of the summer challenges. But the bottom line is that winning helps a lot in Louisville. And I do think we are really close now to finding out the NCAA stuff with the FBI, the IARP ruling, I guess I should say, that's a lot of acronyms, but the IARP ruling on these cases and getting a better feel for where everybody stands, not just Louisville, and all of the schools that have gone through that process. Hopefully we'll be close to finding that out soon. There was a rapid investigation from the NCAA about the Dino Gaudio stuff. I would assume that would be something that comes out sooner rather than later, especially if it is just the minor, I shouldn't say just, but minor violations that will be alleged in the notice of allegations. So you would think that sooner rather than later, all of this stuff will be ironed out and Louisville can kind of go back to being focused on basketball. And if you talk to Chris Mack about it, it's hard to pinpoint. It's hard to exactly quantify how the NCAA cloud, I guess is the best word for it, that has hung over Louisville for a few years, how that has directly impacted recruiting. But there's the vibe and there's a conversation among people who know the recruiting community, who are in the recruiting community, and from Chris Mack and his staff. It has affected it in some way, shape, or form. Who knows how much, but it has affected it. So I think as gloomy as it has sometimes been, and you're right, Rob, in the sense that fans are probably just wondering, when is this all going to end? There is very much an end in sight, and it's not that far off.
As long as they stop making mistakes and keep messing everything up. All right, so let's talk about this actual team, because for a while it's kind of felt like Louisville and Chris Mack were spinning their tires a little bit as they're trying to get this thing going. But they actually do have a little bit of an intriguing roster, assuming that a couple things happen. So let's first and foremost, I mean, look, they're losing David Johnson. And they are losing. Why am I blanking on
Harlik Jones?
Harlik Jones. There you go. Yeah, I completely blanked on his name. But so they're losing one of the best backcourts in college basketball. What is that impact going to be? How are they going to replace those two? And are you concerned about some of the new pieces that are coming in at all?
They're replacing them sort of by committee at first. I think we'll see how it shakes out. L. Ellis was the number one junior college prospect in the country, was the kind of the linchpin of their recruiting class. And then they hit the transfer portal, and you add a Noah Locke, who is a lights out 3-point shooter, career 40% 3-point shooter, who gives them, I know they talked to him about being a playmaker and having the ball in his hands at times, but if nothing else, bare minimum, it gives you a guy who you would think would average 10, 12 points a game and be a consistent two guard who can hit shots for you, which just that alone is a step up for Louisville. I mean, you're talking about a team that just was absolutely miserable shooting the ball last season, to the point where if you watch that ACC tournament game against Duke that they lost at the end of the season, that kind of sank their NCAA tournament hopes, Duke basically just sat in the paint and said, LOL, try to make some shots. Let's see how this goes. And they did not. So Noah Locke's a big addition, but then you got Jared West, who is an all-conference USA guard, is a big assist guy. I think he has the single season assist record at Marshall, was the career steals leader at Marshall as well. So he's got some credibility. So when you mix that group up, you're already in good shape. And that's where the Mason Faulkner addition at the end of the summer really gives them a different dynamic. He's a physical guard, was a star at Western Carolina. So when you have two veteran point guard-ish type guys, West is much more so of a point guard than Faulkner. Faulkner's more of a combo guard. You've got the combo guard in L. Ellis, Noah Locke's a sharpshooter, and a top 100 recruit in Mike James, who can play the two and has been taught primarily the two, who has been very impressive through the summer, according to people who have been at practices and they've talked about it. So that's your mix of talent. You can't replace Harlik Jones. You just can't. But you can come up with a solution to get some other guys opportunities. And I think they feel like with that group, you will see two primary guys emerge, but you'll also have some depth, which is much more than they could say last year.
Yeah, and I do think competition for positions in a situation like that isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially when you have some experienced guys that are all going to be trying to, I mean, there's a reason why these guys transferred up, basically, right? They want to be able to earn some minutes and get some playing time in the ACC, and having to beat somebody out, I think, makes everybody better. To me, the X factor for this team is going to end up being Samuell Williamson and what he kind of develops into this year. Is he a guy that can fulfill that potential that we all saw when he got to Louisville? Is he someone that's just going to be, I mean, he wasn't a bad basketball player last year, but he wasn't quite the guy that we all expected, and that I think that they probably end up needing this year if they're going to make that step from being like a good tournament team, maybe a second weekend team, to actually being a team that can make a threat, to make a run and maybe make some noise in the ACC. What are you hearing about him, and what are you expecting out of him this year?
Yeah, there's two guys who I think are clear in a way the most important players for Louisville. It's Samuell Williamson and Jalen Withers. And those two guys have been talked about the most through the summer in terms of how they've looked, the work that they have put in, the progress that they have made. And it's obviously different when you're talking about a freshman coming in. What progress have they made? A guy who's going from a backup role to a starting role. This is guys who are already productive, if somewhat inconsistent, especially Withers down the stretch, to, okay, how do you go from being regulars and relatively inconsistent to being stars. What's that next step? Because they have to be the two go-to guys for Louisville. You're going to have other options, but they are their most dynamic players. For Sam Williamson, the vibe all summer has been he put in the work and he's making a lot of progress. He switched to a set shot with his jump shot. He's going to look a little bit more like a Paul George when he's shooting his jump shot. Before, it was very much jumping as high as he could and then getting into his release. So his mechanics are a little bit better and involve more of his whole body delivery. Which was a big thing. Our buddy Evan Daniels, I'll never forget. I always reference this. When Louisville got Sam Williamson, Evan was saying, I think he's got the mechanics to be a good 3-point shooter. He's already a good mid-range shooter, which he still is, but the mechanics have to match. They have to be good from 15 feet and they have to be good from 22 feet. And Sam had a hard time doing that early in his career. So it's a consistency. Chris Mack has talked about this too, of seeing the ball go in early in the games would help him. He needs to now get to the mindset where how he's shooting does not affect him whatsoever with everything else. Because I mean, Sam Williamson was the best rebounder, I believe, in the ACC. I mean, by average, I think it was certainly among the best. And his rebounding percentages were really good. So if he can add the 3-point shot and the ability to create a little bit off the dribble, a little bit more, I should say, he should be able to take that turn and help Louisville out and give them that dynamic option off the wing.
Let's talk about Malik Williams a little bit. He's been banged up, but I know you've talked about this in the past, how he's kind of that veteran leadership presence. I know when you had him on your show, you talked about some of the impact that he had on some of the social justice movements that were actually happening in that city, and the way that he kind of took a leadership role on that. So I think that getting him, he's a very good defensive center, right? But I think that there's probably some value in just having that kind of leadership presence on a team that's going to have so many new faces and new people in bigger roles. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. So he has spent his entire career just slowly but surely developing into this bona fide leader. And this will be his 5th year, 4 of them under Chris Mack. So he knows what Mack wants. He's worked closely with Mike Pegues, who we just had on Floyd Street's Finest, who's the front court specialist and was a star in his own right at Delaware. And so Malik has really become the voice. Like, he is the voice for Louisville and has been for a couple of years now. There have been other guys who have come in and have been key voices for them. Kristen Cunningham coming in as a grad transfer, Jared West, Carleigh Jones. I mean, the list is long, but he has been the mainstay over the years. And it's just different when he's in the locker room or on the sideline versus standing in the middle of their defense and being the guy walking off into timeouts and in the timeout huddle. He's sitting there versus standing in the group behind you. It's a whole different dynamic. So that's a huge plus. And I think that's a big underrated part of Malik Williams and what he brings for Louisville is he is their best post scorer. And he was not that way coming out of high school. He was a top 25-star kid coming out of high school who, Rick Pitino is definitely capable of hyperbole. There's no doubt about that. But he did compare Malik to Kevin Durant.
No way, Rick. Everything.
Yeah, no. Cornell has the best motion offense he's ever seen. Stuff like that. But no, he said that Malik Williams reminded him of. Obviously, he was not saying he was Kevin Durant, but reminded him of playing that style where he's 6'11" and he can step out. And I think Malik kind of early on was drifting to the 3-point line. He was settling for a lot of jump shots, and it didn't pan out very well. It wasn't bad, but it just was inconsistent. And over time working with Pegues, he has developed some moves in the post, and Louisville now will be able to play a much more spaced out offense where they have a reliable post scorer. So that's another big aspect of having a healthy Malik Williams. And they're going to try to I know Chris hates this phrase, but he did say load management is going to kind of be a thing for Malik Williams. They're going to try to keep him fresh for February, March when it really matters most.
Yeah, I mean, when you have someone that's banged up, you want to make sure that why waste them the healthy minutes on November games that you're paying opponents to come in for.
Yes.
You mentioned L. Ellis a little bit. You mentioned Michael James. Just kind of run through some of these bench guys, some of the rotation players, some of the guys that you think are going to have important roles. I mean, Dre Davis was someone that looked really intriguing in some of his minutes last season. I think Matt Cross coming in from Miami is a guy that had a little bit of hype a couple months ago. So what are you seeing from this bench? What are you seeing from the rotation guys?
So they have 14 scholarship guys, and they've got to figure out who's going to play what role and when and how often. I think, it's the nature of college basketball to assume that out of that mix, you would think one or two of those guys will probably transfer because they're not happy with their playing time. I mean, that's a reality, but I think, yeah. But I think that Chris Mack has been so spooked by last season when they did not have reliable options to come off the bench at guard. They shot so poorly. I'll never forget. I have not updated the stat, but it was into February. The amount of times that they drove and kicked between David Johnson and Carlik Jones, and the catch and shoot 3-point shooter rotation guys shot 22% from three. So, I mean, Louisville had no offensive options. So that's why it was important to build out the depth there. Mm-hmm. I think there's a few important guys. We talked a little bit about the guards. I think L. Ellis, by the end of the season, I would not be surprised if he was a starter. It's just a really dynamic guard. He can play primarily, I think, point guard. He's a creative player. He's played with some really good players at the JUCO level, but we may need some time to adjust to the tempo, and that's why having Jared West is so important. You talked about Mike James. It's really the front court that is so fascinating to me, because you would figure the guys we talked about, Samuell Williamson, Jalen Withers, and Malik Williams, all things being equal, would probably be your starting front court if you're Louisville. So then at forward, JJ Traynor is a really interesting guy. He's a great catch and shoot player. He's really dynamic. I think he has potential down the line to be a pro. Obviously he's entering his second year and he's playing behind Jalen Withers at the 4, but he has that potential to him, that game to him. You would figure he'll get, 10, 15 minutes a game this season. And then you mentioned Dre Davis. I mean, the guy is just a warrior. I don't know what role he's going to have for this team. I'm fascinated to see how it shakes out, because he's going to be competing with Matt Cross. I mean, Matt Cross shot 40% from 3 for Miami, can play both forward positions, although he tends to kind of drift to the 3-point line. So they offer something a little different. So I honestly would not be surprised if those 3 guys have games, strings of games where they're DNPs and then they show up and play 25 minutes. I would not be surprised at all from those 3. The center position, though, Rob, is the most interesting to me. You've got Malik Williams coming off of a foot injury that required surgery, a really bad sprained ankle. He had his bone shaved back, I believe, in February, early March. So you're trying to manage him. He's your go-to guy. You've got Roosevelt Wheeler, who's a top 60 recruit coming off Achilles surgery, who has surprised the coaching staff over the summer with how in shape he is and has really caught up to speed a lot over the last few months. You've got Gabe Wisnitzer, who reclassified, was like 17 and a half last year and had to be used a couple of times. Everyone kind of said, oh, this year they've got depth. He won't have to play. The coaches are like, he's looked really good. He's gotten in great shape. And then you have Sidney Curry transferred in a JUCO center from Malik Williams' hometown, Fort Wayne, Indiana, who is 6'9", came in at 300 pounds. They want to get him down to 260. And so you've got all these different options behind Malik Williams. And I'm just fascinated to find out how this whole thing shakes out. If I had to bet, I would say Roosevelt Wheeler is my leader in the clubhouse to be the primary backup center. But that's why they play the games.
So we can end it with this. What is the one thing that you think needs to happen for Louisville to be in the mix with the other top 3 or 4 teams? I think Duke and North Carolina and Virginia Tech, Virginia, Florida. There's a lot of good teams at the top of the ACC this year. What is the one thing that has to happen for Louisville to be competing with those guys for an ACC title?
Yeah, it's a great conference this year because I mean, there's talent on paper, obviously, for Duke and some of these other teams, but it does feel kind of wide open with that top 7 or 8 teams. I mean, Syracuse could finish 8th or they could win the league. I don't know. For Louisville in particular, somebody who I've seen in some season previews has not been mentioned in others. I think you've had the chance to meet him. Correct me if I'm wrong. Ross Mcmahon. Have you met him at some point over the summer?
We crossed paths at Peach Jam, I believe, but
there you go.
Yeah, it wasn't much.
Yeah. So Ross McMahon's is brought in. He's got international coaching experience, has worked down under New Zealand and Australia. And in the offseason, he would come back to the U.S. and run pro workouts, and has worked out guys who are affiliated with Louisville who have come through town over the summer too. I mean, this guy is a legit asset for Louisville to add, and he's like 32. He's this young boy wonder, and he has been basically asked to revamp Louisville's offense. So Louisville's offense is going to look a lot more like a pro offense than whatever it was that we watched last season. It was not fun to watch their games at all. So I would expect their tempo to be better. So for me, if Louisville is going to be in the mix for those teams, with those teams, they are run an up-tempo offense that really homes in on the guys who can catch and shoot and make shots in transition, the Noah Locks, the Matt Crosses, L. Ellis, I mean, Jared West. They've got a bunch of shooting options. So can they get out and run at times? Can they be smart about how they do it? Can they space the floor? And can they be a much more dynamic offense? If it is that much more efficient than last season, I think they ended up having what would have been the second worst effective field goal percentage of any team in the NCAA tournament had they made the field. If they can vastly improve on that, that is going to be a major difference maker for Louisville this coming season and keep them in the mix with all those other really good teams.
Well, listen, Greer, I appreciate the time. If you guys are listening to this, make sure you subscribe to Floyd Street's Finest, the podcast that Jeff hosts on the Field 68 Media Network, and also subscribe to his newsletter, the Floyd Street Tribune.
Hey,
just go check his Twitter feed. Check his Twitter feed. Go find it there. Jeff is the best when it comes to covering Louisville basketball. Greer, always appreciate the time, my man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.